nothing to do with work or anything, just family and stuff. But, you know.
Okay. Welcome to the Westborough Affordable Housing Trust meeting of Thursday, November 10th, 2022. We are meeting at Town Hall in Memorial Hall at 34 West Main Street, Westborough. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast using Westborough TV. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes for, first of all, September 27th, which was our short meeting to...
I reviewed those, so I will say a motion to approve.
Okay.
Seconded.
Okay. Well, any discussion, changes? I didn't have any. All those in favor? Okay. 6 present, 6 in favor. Moving on, the next minutes are for October 13th, which was our normally scheduled monthly meeting, and I had just a minor or two corrections.
Mr. Rain sent me 2 minor grammatical issues on page 2 under the 928 agenda item bullets 2 and 3. There was a miscapitalization of the word "or," and I actually put a semicolon in to connect the 2 sentences, as opposed to a comma.
Okay.
Call me a radical. And then in the third bullet point, there was an extra word to "to."
Not that I'm OCD.
That has been moved. I also noticed that in the heading, I did not include the time that I joined the meeting live and switched from remote to live. So that's been updated as well. That was 9:30.
Okay. Any other corrections or changes to the minutes for the 27th, or the 13th, rather, October 13th?
Move we approve the minutes of October 13, 2022, as amended.
Seconded.
Okay. Any discussion? No. All those in favor, raise your hands. 6 in favor, 6 present. Okay. Next on the agenda is the discussion at 3 Baylor Avenue. I think we have Hank, and
You left me off, but
Yeah,
that's okay.
me and everybody.
Nancy and Ken toured the facility, toured the building with some folks from Habitat that came on board to kind of just give us their opinion of what.
Why don't you make
makes
sure the
sense.
mics, you're
Can you-
close enough to the
Yeah,
mic.
to give us their opinion on, what might make sense in terms of affordable housing, given that they've got some experience. Maybe they can tell you what they discovered and what they discussed and what the options and issues are.
Sure, I'll start and Ken can finish, I guess. I guess the first, I don't think there'll be any surprises, the first piece of information is that this building is not salvageable. This is going to be a rebuild. We can't tear it down to the studs because there are none. I think even Ken noticed that it's built out of plywood. They said the only thing of value is the exterior oil tank, not that we would use it for the rebuild, but we could donate it somewhere. The front door, in a pinch, we could reuse, although nobody was enthusiastic about that idea. And there is a light in the back, has a chain with a prism on the end that is old, and they said that's probably the most valuable thing in the building. So we should try to reuse that. I think that would be kind of nice wherever what happens. They took some measurements. They mentioned that they will most likely be a bidder. The Habitat for Humanity will be a bidder on this project when that comes. And also just a couple of background things. They wanted us all, because I'm very ignorant about the different groups, I know there's other groups that'll be interested, is they gave us, I don't have extra copies, but they gave us a flyer of some of the buildings that they have done, and they said that this middle one, and I'll pass it around, would actually fit on the property subject to zoning. And they are building it in Sturbridge, and they invite us all, if people are interested, we could do a tour of the construction set to see what it looks like. I just had to take a collection of hands, and we'll schedule a date that works for everybody. As Ken and I said, road trip, everybody in for a road trip? And what else was that they wanted us to know, Ken? I'm trying to remember. There was more.
We took measurements for the setbacks And more or less the true measurement of the whole property and the house, the structure that's there existing. And we found out that it's not a perfectly square lot. It is skewed, which it was kind of obvious before we even pulled the tapes, but we discovered it for sure. We took measurements, recorded them, and I guess it's going to now be up to the town with the building inspector, that department, to take a look or to provide us with the necessary information that we're going to need to whether or not we can change the location of this, of a new structure, because it's obvious, we all came to that same conclusion, along with the folks from Habitat for Humanity, that the structure's not worth saving at all. There's nothing there.
Yeah, because the hope is, there's really no room on the sides. But, you know, it's already non-conforming, but it has a relatively deep lot.
Back lot.
But if it's not square, I know there's rules about if a backyard narrows, you're limited in how far back you can go, so.
Right.
So, yeah, I think survey and zoning are probably going to be
And there's
critical.
also the possibility of instead of
I should pass this.
the house facing the road, if you will, to actually turn, you could actually turn the structure
Right.
So,
and pick up the space that you might need. Who knows? That's going to be up for discussion, and some ideas that other people have.
But I think it does mean, you know, Hank and I sent out a very draft RFP, and it was for reconstruction or rebuilding. I think it's just going to be for a rebuild. It's not, I think we probably will end up wanting to amend that, because there's nothing salvageable there.
Right.
Right.
okay.
And last but not least, they also offered if we were interested to learn more about the habitat, and this may be something we want to offer to other groups, is they would come and meet with us and tell us how it works. Because Habitat for Humanity, it's more than just that they'll answer an RFP, but they have a program where, like, the owners have to put so many community hours in and working on the house. And if we're interested in learning more about their program, they'll come and do a presentation to us at one of our meetings.
You mean like the potential owners or,
Yeah, the potential, the end owners, the end owners will,
yeah. Is that possible with the ability with affordable, you know,
Oh, yeah.
because we won't know who the buyers are until
Yes,
everything's
yes, you
done?
will.
I'm sorry, say again?
You'll complete the marketing effort before the building's finished.
Right, so with Habitat for
Yep.
Humanity, the lottery is run prior to construction.
Well,
Or
to my
early
knowledge,
on.
to my knowledge, lotteries are run prior to construction on all these buildings. All affordable stuff,
No.
I mean, DHCD requires you to put together a marketing plan,
Right,
and the marketing plan is usually executed before the building's finished. The house, it's rare for the house to be customized
true.
in terms of floor, design, footprint, et cetera. But it's usual for there to be some minor customizations in the family selection, but it's very rare, not a lot.
Yes, I'm reading the flyer, and again, this is just a
Right.
flyer, maybe we need to speak more. Every partner family invests 400 to 500 hours of
Yep.
sweat equity. The hours include construction, education, and community activities. And it goes on, you know, so. They've
this
been
is-
doing this, so I hope, they work with other trusts, they did
Oh,
mention
yeah,
that,
yeah,
so.
yeah.
And I appreciate all the information, just as we start talking about things like what would fit on the lot and changing the location. One of our guiding principles is to blend in and be respectful of the neighborhood, right? So,
Right.
given that neighborhood, we probably wouldn't look at a two-story structure,
There
Yeah, I
are
mentioned
some
that.
two-story structures in the neighborhood.
but deeper in the neighborhood as opposed to.
There's one
that
right
corner.
across the street
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
that's got a partial, I can't remember if it's a full or partial second floor.
yeah, we'd have to sort of
Well,
look
Yeah,
at
'cause
that and look at the size of the house and.
This was brought up because
Could
they
be.
were talking about a second, and I said, gee, you know, it's got to fit in the neighborhood, and you're right, like, I think most of these buildings are all single stories, but across the street, I don't know, there might be one that's a full second story. A lot of additions have been put on the houses. I would say, we can do a drive-through, but I don't think having a two, as long as it wasn't overly huge, I mean, it's all about scale. I don't think a two-story would, you know, we can discuss it, but I don't think a two-story would necessarily look out of
It's-
place here.
It's unusual to lock in on the design and footprint and floor plan before you hire it, before you select the developer.
No,
It's a
agreed,
consideration.
agreed, but I think in doing an initial review of the draft RFP.
Oh, yeah.
I would look at the RFP to say, approximately how many square feet,
Yep.
whether or not we want 1 or 2 stories, or whether we'd consider it.
I mean, you can say whether.
Number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms.
That's
the-
in there.
The grade, well, there's a separate document, sort of the criteria we've been discussing, but also the RFP about, which appliances, what grade of appliance, expectations about grade of, is it 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch drywall, or,
Sure, I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to,
So-
again, if you look at the RFP we've drafted, there's a lot of that stuff in there, and we may want to add to that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or
We want
subtract.
to add or subtract,
Yeah.
because, we have to remember, every time you add, adds my developer friend here knows, whenever you add features, it adds money.
Yeah. The most important thing is like what this RFP draft is covering is that the building has to be to code.
Right.
So if 5/8 sheetrock is code, you don't have to
Right.
worry about the
Right.
cost of 3/4. The contractor's going to build it to code, period. So it's not like a discussion. It really is, that's mass building code, and it's all driven now by energy savings and things like that. So everybody would be guided by the same rules, if you will. And then the building inspectors are going to, do their job and be diligent, make sure everything's built the right way.
But we'll still have to decide amongst the trust, where we're looking for, I guess it depends also what we can fit. We have a little bit of an egg, chicken issue. It's like, what can we fit? Do we have a survey scheduled yet? I know that's
Survey the field work should occur next week, and a week or two after that, we'd have in our hands a sketch with certified dimensions on the lot. When they're done with the survey, they'll actually pin the corners.
Good.
There'll be iron pins dropped
Yeah.
at the 4 corners, and they'll have, again, certified dimensions, PE stamped, et cetera, all that good stuff, showing where the existing building is. And we can have a conversation, we can have an informal conversation with the building department as to what, will they consider a 2-story, what can we do inside the guidelines of the town bylaws without going through a ZBA process? We can always decide, hey, we'll go through a ZBA process, but I believe from prior conversations with Fred that he'll be pretty flexible about not putting us through a ZBA process.
right. And there is some more flexibility if it's an existing non-conforming structure.
Yeah, there's,
Which
what I
it is.
remember is 50% or 1,000 square feet increase in size. And as long as so which in this case would be like 500 square feet plus or minus. So you could put a 1,500 square foot building on that property. That's a pretty good sized affordable home.
Yeah.
I mean, 12, 1250, 13, somewhere in there is typical. And again, from a prior conversation quite a while ago, as long as we stay within the existing zoning inside the current zoning setbacks, he'll allow modification of the footprint.
Right.
I think he'd allow a second story, but we just have to have those informal conversations again. And then the developer will have to, once you select somebody, they'll actually have to go through the permitting process.
And I guess my other question about the RFP is, given the fact that it's slab,
Is it,
Well, again, the
There's no
developer
basement.
will come in and say whether they would prefer to do a full basement or modify the existing slab or do a new slab on grade.
okay. I think it might be beneficial to, in the RFP, indicate that we're open to both
Sure.
stick construction as well as prefab.
Sure.
is that what you call it, stick construction?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, frame,
kind of the
stick
industry
build.
term, stick build.
It's just when you build it, put up all your 2x4s and walls and everything. Yeah, I think I don't know with Habitat whether they prefer stick built versus modular. Obviously with, you'll often see Jimmy Carter out there with the hammer on the
Yeah,
stick
I mean,
built.
it's rare. I mean,
versus-
it's rare for single-family affordable homes in this part of the country to be prefabbed. It's rare. So, areas where labor is hard to acquire, et cetera, it's much more common.
Right.
Habitat's model would prefer a stick build because they generate a lot of donations by way of participation in the build activities.
Right.
They also generate a lot of donations of materials and such. It's hard to do that with prefab.
Right.
But I do know that, but if you go down south, and there's areas in the south where nobody does, I mean, they do lots and lots of prefab on small.
There was recently a prefab 24-unit building put up in Worcester,
Yeah, there's,
and a lot more prefab in New York State, where it's about I'm not sure given where the economy and supply chain is now, but at times prefab can be significantly less expensive.
Yep.
Because of the reduced
Yep.
labor
I
involved.
mean,
and
the material costs are not
Different,
less.
right.
In general, in fact, they're frequently more, because the over-the-road transportation requires additional structural strength inside the
Strength,
buildings.
yep.
But there's a great, developers often go prefab because they want a time saving. They can bring the building from construction start to market a lot faster. And also, it solves some labor problems, and it creates some labor problems. If your job site is basically a non-union, or the preferred term is merit shop site, prefab's easier to do. If your job site is a union site, it's more difficult to do prefab, because the union contracts usually specify that it's got to come out of a union shop, and a lot of the prefab shops are not union shops.
Right.
There are some, I mean,
Right. I'm just asking that the RFP indicate that we're open to
yeah,
both methods of construction, and
Yep.
I'm not sure if we've done, we're not drilling on the site, we don't, the building department might know if there's slab or other issue, why the construction of those homes was slab to begin with.
Well, I think it's
Could-
also going to be a zoning issue, won't it? Because we're going to be increasing the square footage if we,
No, it was a question.
Well, unfinished basement doesn't necessarily count, and, I mean, the rules around, I think, part of the conversation with the building department would be the feasibility or allowability of a basement.
The slab-on grade versus full basement is a fairly classic argument. There's some folks who believe the slab-on grade is more cost-effective and easier. And there are some folks, I call them the New England folks, who are absolutely wedded to their root cellar, and building a house without a root cellar.
Yeah, I just want to make sure there's not a technical, before we,
No, I mean,
Technical reason.
on that site, it's very unlikely that they had a problem with ledge and stone and such on that site.
and with the outside half-buried oil tank
it's
Now,
not
this
very.
this is not very, this is an above-ground oil tank.
above ground.
It'll
Okay.
cost about $600 to get it removed. I got the number in my computer. I had the oil company come and check it to make sure it was empty, so that we were confident it was safe, and it is. And while they were there, I said, hey, give me a price on what it takes to remove it. I think it's zero probability that you would want to put an oil-fired furnace into a new home in this town, in any town, quite honestly.
Right.
You either go with gas, propane, or I believe in Westborough, the community certainly has expressed a preference for mini split, or the one where they drill holes in the ground and bring the water up. I forget what they call it.
The geothermal, yeah.
The geothermal, I'm
So the
sorry.
heat pump.
Thermal.
So, yeah,
Is
this
there,
was,
is there any indication of soil contamination?
Uh,
Do we need a,
No, I didn't see anything, but
do we
again.
need a level
yeah,
one
um,
Or,
you mean phase one?
I mean, the
Phase-
developer's
phase one
gonna have to,
test.
the developer's gonna have to deal with that, because it depends on what the building department wants. They may want a level one or a phase one
okay.
assessment. I don't know, Ken, do you know, and because of the asbestos in the shingles and the floor, will they need to do that anyway?
They're going to have to abate that, even with a complete
Right. So-
tear down. So there'll be a document opened with the state, with the DEP, that they're aware that a permit has been pulled.
Yeah.
And then a hygienist has to come in at the end, and they'll take some random samples here and there. But I don't see any reason why we would even believe that there's any contamination
I don't think there's any.
in the soils at all.
There wasn't
It's
any
all-
buried
No.
tanks.
No, there's no buried tanks. There's
That all
there's no
takes new?
reason to even think that.
Right.
But while they're there, naturally,
Get
the
aboard.
contractor, if they do go with a full foundation type build, and even when they're taking out the existing slab,
Yep.
they're going to find out what's underneath it.
Yep.
And if they see something, it's their job. to let the-
Responsibility.
Their responsibility.
Right.
To let the town know that, hey, we have an issue here, what's this? You know, there could be some transite, which again is asbestos-based drainage pipe or something under
Yep.
the house or whatever. I don't think so.
I doubt it, but
Yeah,
you'll find out.
yeah, you'll find out, but it's not a big deal. But before, they have to get a clean bill of health.
Yep.
And a hygienist has to come in that's registered with the state of Mass.
Yep.
And to do their due diligence with sampling and things like that of the surrounding soils where the demolition took place, and make sure there's no contaminants there. So I think that'll take care of everything.
And I think some of the demo materials will have to go into a secure landfill, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they will.
Which
The
makes
thing
sense.
is with the slab, the existing slab, it depends on, we know that there's asbestos tile, so I'm sure there's asbestos mastic, which is for glue,
Yeah.
underneath that.
Yep, yep.
And how, depending on how long it is, how far that it leaches into the concrete. Okay, so we've done jobs where the concrete also had to be taken away and disposed of, landfilled like out west. So a dumpster for the concrete becomes an issue. Your costs, because that's the heaviest part of the demolition would be the concrete slab on grade. However, if we stay with the existing slab, you can coat, after taking off the asbestos and the mastic, okay, clean that, again, get the hygienist approval. You can coat the top of the slab, okay, and then rebuild right on the existing slab. And if you decide, if that's the case, you can, if we enlarge the footprint of the home, you can do a full basement underneath the added space, or, again, a slab on grade.
Yep.
Just make that existing slab on grade larger.
Expand
Yeah.
it, lay
So you really have to
somewhere.
look at the costs. It might be worthwhile to just keep the slab if it's structurally sound, which
Yeah.
I don't, what do
Looks
you
like it
think?
probably is, but
Yeah, I don't
I
think
didn't
there's
notice any
issues
cracks
with
or
it.
anything.
If you-
And,
Go ahead.
and then just coat it after the abatement process and get the sign off by the state certified hygienist and coat it properly and then build over it.
Right. And they could, if you, as you said, expand, you could do a full basement there if for no other reason,
For a
just for
small-
utility.
Yeah.
You know, you
Yeah,
could
just
put
build a
your
utility room on it.
utility
Yeah.
units
Storage
down
space.
there, water heater
I mean,
and everything.
Makes
Typically
sense.
with the slab on grade stuff, there's a utility room anyway for furnaces and stuff like that.
Well, there is currently,
And-
but
and
if you
then
wanted to regain that
Yeah,
space
I mean, and then
for
typically,
living
folks,
space.
when folks do slab on grade, single-family home, they'll typically put an oversized shed in the yard.
But if we're-
Oversized garden
but
shed for
if-
storage.
If we're looking at specing stretch code or even net zero from sustainability, then you're looking at heat pumps
Right.
or geothermal, so you wouldn't have a furnace room.
No,
Not in the traditional,
and
sense, yeah.
If you went with tankless hot water,
You don't
you
need
know,
much room.
one in the kitchen and one in each bath, then
so
you wouldn't,
you just kind of build a utility room somewhere for storage and such.
yeah, it's more
Right.
storage.
They have one there now that's, behind the kitchen bath area.
I haven't walked through yet, I should get the code.
Yeah. Give me a piece of paper, I'll give it to you. No, I think it would be helpful. It's all cleaned out now.
Yes,
Some of us walked through when it wasn't cleaned
I
out.
warned you.
I warned
It
you.
smells a lot better,
The
too.
draft RFP at the moment calls for I don't remember what it says, geothermal or heat pump, but I think
Says a
maybe it
heat
says
pump.
heat pump.
Heat pump.
And it says solar panels on a roof. Because I believe, I put that in there because that seems to be where the community's leaning on. And oh, by the way, sometime in the next 3 or 4 years, maybe sooner, that'll become mass code.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I think as we, I guess my suggestion at this point would be, if folks have comments or suggestions on
Yep.
the RFP to, over the next 2 weeks,
Yep.
to send them to Hank, would that give you enough time
Does that
to?
Sure,
seem-
and we'll put
To
it
edit
together
and share back, and we could do a walkthrough of the RFP at our next
Yeah,
meeting.
at the, I think,
And
by the end of Thanksgiving weekend, I don't know, we have this
Yeah, I mean,
calendar
when our
there.
next meeting is, we could have a redraft, I can work with it.
Yeah, and hopefully, even in plugging some numbers you had in there, but I'll add these to my comments, to start in the spring of 2023. We could just say, start as soon as possible. If it's Habitat for Humanity, we're going to do a stick-built, then obviously they want to get it in at least better weather, some of the other stuff that can be done. Here's my question with Habitat for Humanity. Given some of the remediation, if you will, we were just talking about, how much do they deal with that?
They'll hire that all out.
Okay, so that, but would we transfer ownership? Here, let's just step
Yeah.
off
Yes.
as far as in the RFP, it states that we would transfer deed
Yep.
based upon the assumption or the obligation that the home be sold per, what was there's a term you used, LIP. Yeah, the
Right, it has a perpetual,
perpetual deed,
rider on the deed.
rider on
Yes.
the deed and 80% of AMI, et cetera,
Right.
It lays it out in there, so it's very clear that this is an affordable
Yeah.
house.
And generally what's done is you write the RFP, and you hire, go through the process, select a developer,
Yep.
and then with that developer, they prepare plans and proposals as to what they're gonna build, which we review, and that becomes part of a land development agreement. Before you transfer the deed, you actually cut a legal agreement that I'm used to calling a land development agreement that determines that includes performance terms, that says they have to perform in a certain amount of time. If
Right.
they don't perform in a certain amount of time, the land reverts back to the trust, et cetera, so that you don't, because sometimes some of these nonprofit developers they're not as strong as you might like.
So, and the other component of that is knowing the RFP response needs a design and needs at least a projected sale price from DHCD.
well-
Because that'll determine what, if any, subsidy is necessary.
The response to the RFP will require them to give us a budget for the activity and indicate if they're expecting any subsidies beyond the land transfer,
Right.
and how
So
much
we-
the
we-
subsidies, right?
From Hank's last, from your, spreadsheet showing, based upon size of family, et cetera, the 80% AMI, you were using, I think, how should I say, regular house built, i.e. not using volunteer, $300 per square foot, something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm totally out of touch with.
Yeah, I know, but
Numbers,
you had made some assumptions. You laid out a good model.
Yeah,
I mean, you can change some of the assumptions. But it would seem that we will have to subsidize, given those costs. If we were to go to a, kind of regular developer, we should be, I think we should probably be prepared to have a subsidy that's probably in the 50 or more K range.
Well, I
just
mean-
from some of the numbers I looked at. But
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it'll
up to,
it'll
but
really-
it depends
it'll really come
upon
back
the
to
developer.
Where the bids are. And
Say again?
It depends on where the bids are and how we establish the evaluation criteria.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, but I'm just saying it's,
one thing I've learned about, given the towns involved in a recent land and bidding and sale, and even hindsight at this early stage, the more evaluation criteria we define,
Yep.
the better, as
Right.
far as making an informed decision and clearly setting expectations for the bidders.
now this RFP, did you use any template that you knew of? or-
Yeah, I pulled an RFP that had been issued by the Upton Land Trust some time ago that I happen to have available, that was issued in a Word document format.
Right.
And I pulled a couple of RFPs that were public RFPs, one from Holliston, and I don't remember where the other one was from, and just kind of looked at the terms and translated a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
I would recommend that we ask Nancy maybe to talk, take it and talk with Shaw and
Yeah.
make sure,
Yeah.
Shaw, the procurement
The
officer.
procurement officer that we're
Ask her
hitting the right.
if she would give you some time to kind of just read it and give us her things that she would like to see added to it, and tell us her process for issuing the RFP, because I assume she'll issue the RFP, actually,
Yeah,
for us. I mean, she's the
She
community
can,
procurement
I believe
officer.
she can facilitate it. We will also obviously need review by council.
Right.
Right.
I meant to
What we can do is just to give her a heads up, and we could even give her this current, I have it printed out, I can give her this copy, or well, it's better, I can email it to
I'd
her.
wait till we're further along in the process.
Yeah.
You would before?
Yes,
Okay.
it's very rough right now.
Let's-
Oh, no, I didn't know if she should be one that would comment, or we wait until we get our next draft. You're saying wait until we get
Wait
our
till the
next
next
draft?
draft, so it's material, so we think we're,
We're at
75,
maybe
80.
75, 80% there,
There.
and then let her take a whack at it.
and then
And
she'll handle all
She's
the,
full-time and
the Ts and Cs and
has
stuff.
more time.
And council as well, yeah.
Yeah,
And council as
you-
well.
You don't want to go to council till you got something you're ready to issue, because all they're gonna, the council is just gonna make sure that it meets all the legal requirements, that the wording's correct and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
They're not gonna comment about the criteria you're using, they're gonna just make
Yes, they
sure.
will.
Oh, they will, okay.
Yeah.
To make sure that you're in
Well,
line with.
because the wording of the criteria can create problems,
Okay.
or there's certain criteria that
You can't
You
put in.
can or
you
can't.
can't put in, or, they'll come back and say, ooh, here, we understand why you've done the criteria, but here's an unintended consequence. right? That could result.
Can I ask, what is the intended issuance date for the RFP? I guess we should work backwards. Are we trying to get it out by January, February?
I
I'm
mean,
just
if you
wondering.
want a spring start, you gotta get it out by January.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have to get it out by around the end of the year
Yeah,
to
it'd be nice to
beginning
be
of
out before
early
the end
next
of the
year,
year,
so
but-
that they could start in the spring.
No
Yeah, we
later
get
than
everything
early
back, things like that, and then they're ready to go as soon as,
Is that achievable? I'm thinking if we're not,
If we do a review an in-depth review of the RFP at our next meeting, then send it off for, council and town review, basically, our January meeting, we should be able to have a version of the RFP that's ready for any minor changes and approval for issuance at our January meeting, which is early in January. Once that's done, it can be out within 24 to 48 hours. And we could have responses, and depending on the recommended timeframe from council, we could have responses and make a decision at our March meeting.
sounds good.
I mean, if it's okay, I would also suggest I go talk to Fred, the building department, and just say, hey, it's gonna be a tear down. Can you just give us clarity on what guidelines we need to stay within to,
Yeah.
we'll just make sure those guidelines are in the,
In the RFP.
and if he may say, hey, there's no way you're gonna get away without going to,
Special
ZBA's
permit.
the ZBA, then we can have the conversation at our December meeting as to,
Start that process.
you start and we can have the conversation, do we want to do a friendly 40B? Do you want to do a standard ZBA process? What do you want to do?
Okay.
Okay, good. All right, well, we're pretty much on time here.
Make a good progress.
Thank you so much for all the work, particularly Nancy, Hank, and Ken in sussing this out and, getting as far as you have. I mean, I think we're we're in a good place.
Yep.
And particularly get a nonprofit developer to pick this up. Hopefully will minimize the amount of, we're doing a lot of work now, but hopefully that will save us some work down the road. We're not going to be the contractor, the overall contractor. And, you know, I know Westborough is a very generous community. If we went with a developer that would accept, encourage volunteer participation, there are a number of groups that, you know, would be willing, such as ASP and places like that, where, you know, you probably want to have like high school age kids and, you know, doing stuff as well as, you know, I mean, Assabet is outstanding as far as, you know, their programs, and I'm sure they provide or encourage opportunities for their students to work on real-life projects.
Often get Assabet to do the skilled trades, if you can, you know, if you're willing to accept their schedule. But
Right, I know, you have to
they'll do
work
plumbing
with
and
them.
electrical, but you gotta have a construction schedule that aligns with their academic schedule, and you have to get their agreement ahead of time, and,
Right,
but they're certainly cost-effective.
yep. Very cost-effective, and they turn out, I mean, everybody I've worked with from there, it's very
they're all-
impressed with the quality of their
Yep,
programs there.
They do good work.
They do good work, and they do outstanding training of the students there. We're fortunate to have that in our neighborhood, that, you know, that kind of school, voc tech school. Okay, let's move on. The residents at Westborough Station, we have a little bit of an update on that. Alan, you want to
Sure.
bring in everybody, maybe sort of give them a little background and then bring them
Sure,
up to date?
so high-level background, the residents at Westborough Station, it's a 120-unit development, 24 were restricted as affordable. The current owner of the property believes that the affordability restriction is ending, and they have a right to end it under a decision by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, commonly known as the Ardmore decision. The affordability restriction related to financing is the purview of the Mass Housing Finance Authority. However, the construction of 120 apartment units in an area zoned residential 1 is a zoning issue with the town. The town's not a party to the affordability restrictions there, but under Ardmore, it states that unless the comprehensive permit specifies, you know, as far as the zoning goes, an end for affordability, then the affordability restriction must stay in place until such time as the property conforms with the underlying zoning. And so, which for this development will mean, unless they're going to tear down the 120 units and put up single-family homes, the affordability restriction would need to stay, you know, effectively in perpetuity, or until they took such an action. The property owner removed.
We initially, the
What?
town.
The town filed suit in
Filed
land
suit,
court to
right.
enforce. There is a counterclaim against the town for damages for the fact that we're suing them. That will play out, however those things play out. But the property owner removed the suit to the U.S. District Court.
Normally, this would be held, I'm sorry to interrupt, I know,
try-
normally
I'm trying
this
to
would
keep
be
it brief.
held
You
in
said
land
keep it
court.
brief.
Huh?
Right, I said we filed in land court.
In land court, okay,
Right.
I'm sorry. I
We could have
misheard.
done Superior Court, but we did land court.
We
for a
did
number of
land
reasons.
court.
But recommendation of town council, the town filed in land court. It was removed to the U.S. District Court for a number of claims of federal jurisdiction, and the most concerning one was that the Ardmore decision violates the U.S. Constitution as what's known as a regulatory taking, which would be without due process. The good news is the hearing was finally held, the judge made her ruling.
At district
and
court
set-
level.
At district court, and completely remanded the entire case
Back to land court.
back to land court. We can send, the decision's public record.
Yeah, I actually, if
If
anybody
and
is
wants
interested
to
in
read
reading the
it,
full decision, it's not that long.
It's not that long, and
mean-
I wouldn't mind reading it, actually.
what we like about the decision is
I'll send you a link.
not only, the decision is pretty direct and blunt that not only is there no federal case whatsoever, but that in the eyes of a federal court, the Ardmore decision is valid and would still be settled
case law, too.
Would be settled law. And so it was described by someone to me as a decision that basically is,
A slam dunk?
it's never slam dunk, but it's, you know, basically saying, you know,
The ball's in our end of the court.
it's going back to land court, and the federal judge thinks the land court would rule a certain way. Or there's enough there to, you know, on the argument that we would prevail. Now, that said, there's no such thing as a slam dunk. Land court moves slow. Our town council, the town has been notified by Northland's attorneys that they're going to maintain the status quo on affordability till this is all resolved. As yet, we haven't seen anything in writing. There was supposed to be a filing with the court. We don't know if it's been made yet. We haven't been notified that that's been made yet. And Ed and I need to loop back with the residents we've been talking
I
to.
talked to one resident.
Did they have something in writing?
Well, the only thing they had, I explained the background to them, and I asked, did they receive anything indicating the extension? And this particular person, who's a disabled vet that lives there, said what they did is they presented her, I guess her lease was coming up.
Right.
With a one-year lease extension at the, you know, the rent increase, but
Within the
per
guidelines,
the
Right. HUD guidelines.
setting of HUD
So,
rental agreement. So they may not have sent out something saying
so we're not looking for them, we have no control whether or not how they notify residents or
Right.
whatever, if they do it one at a time as the leases
which
come
is,
due.
sounds like what they're doing.
But if they're doing it for one, it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing it for everyone. They have told the court that they are doing it for everyone, but at this point in time, we have not heard from town council that that paperwork has actually been filed and it is a commitment with the court.
I can ask.
So,
Go
and
ahead.
so it's not anything we have control over, we can influence, we're waiting for that to happen. We'll see what it happens, we'll see, if and when it happens, right? Because,
Just for
but there's an expectation that this is happening, simply because they said it both in front of a land court judge and a district court
Yeah,
judge.
I mean,
Right.
they'll-
It's on the record,
So
But-
they have to extend the leases.
yeah.
Yes.
They said that.
But a
how
vague
they go
statement,
about
a
it
vague
is-
statement in court, they said, oh, we're gonna do X. Okay, are they doing X for everyone? Are they doing it only for a certain period of time? It's when it gets into writing with a filing in the court that you actually know what they're committing to do legally. And so we have not, that may have been filed within the last day or two, we haven't been notified that that's happened. So at this point, we're waiting for a hearing to be scheduled in land court. Back with the judge, all parties were supposed to provide an update to the judge, that's in process as well. And we are coordinating with CHAPA, who's interested in filing an amicus brief
Yep.
with land court. And so we're trying to get the different attorneys connected and working on that.
Alan, any indication that the developer might be interested in negotiating? Or do they seem hell-bent on litigating?
There's no direct indication of negotiation. The restriction on the property is 50% AMI, which is low.
Yep.
It's it's among the lowest, percentage of AMI
Right.
in these types of arrangements. But we haven't, there hasn't been
Yeah. Okay.
a request to negotiate.
To say, hey, if we, can you make it 80?
The ruling from the federal judge didn't recommend sometimes judges will say, I deny your motion and I encourage you to negotiate.
Right, I encourage you guys to talk together.
There was no
No, right.
encouragement or indication
I mean,
that that would be necessary, or, you know, in the
Right.
remand, maybe it wouldn't normal, I don't know if that would or wouldn't be part of a remand order to begin with, but at this point, there's been no direct communication about a desire to negotiate. Doesn't mean it's not gonna happen or won't happen, we just don't know.
Yeah,
So it's,
I
That
assume-
that would be a town decision.
I assume our youth and family services people know that the affordable rents are to be extended.
yes,
So that if any of the tenants are having
Yeah,
problems,
that-
then they contact at least the available town services, the town services can help.
yes.
Are we sure that they do know? This just came out last week, that what the state.
I'll double check, but I believe they were notified. It was,
By town council or Christie or?
by the town manager's office, but I'll double check.
Yeah, why don't we double check today, just to
I'll
make
double
sure
check with
that,
Karen.
I don't know, had you heard anything? No?
Okay, so I'll follow up on that.
Because one of the
And
things
I've got
is
some more
these people
on
have been on
connecting
tender
with
hooks,
and-
you know, for a while, you know, probably coming up on a year now.
It wouldn't seem appropriate for us to communicate directly with the tenants unless the tenants contact us.
We have before,
We've done joint
with.
communications with Youth and Family
Youth and
Services,
Family.
just because
Yeah.
we're visibly involved. But, you know, at this point, I'll make sure I'll follow up and make sure Youth
Yeah,
and Family
great.
Services is aware of the situation. And I know that they'll share it with, you know, the nonprofits, like, you know, that
Right,
may or may,
right.
you know, may be involved. You know, it's, so we're in a better spot now than we were. But it's still chugging through. You know, the wheels of justice move slow and crush things in its path, so. So here we are. And again, just a thanks to the town staff and the folks at KP Law and Town Council, and a thanks to the, you know, residents of Westborough for, you know, their support of the trust and their support of the town when we take these actions, because it's a lot of time and effort.
We did the
This is-
initial spade work to
this-
get it to the point where the town says.
But this is a
okay.
lot of, you know, time and effort and, you know,
But one of the
By
things
town
is
staff and town
by
council.
keeping those 24 affordable under, you know, the current covenant of the comprehensive permit, our SHI gets the benefit of the whole
Yep.
120 units. So to that, it's
There is a benefit.
it's a
really
huge
good.
impact for the town.
You know, and if it had gone, if the district court had accepted the pleading, you know, that could have thrown into disarray all the places that had used Ardmore, which were a number of towns, as the foundation upon which they, you know, were able to keep affordability with these kinds of developments, so.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, this really-
As of census data from September of 2020, there are north of 270,000 affordable units statewide built under comprehensive permit. And so,
And if
with
that
any
all
federal ruling that Ardmore
Yeah.
wouldn't hold would eventually impact the affordability of every one of those units. So, and we're glad that it's back in land court.
So,
Certainly certainly a solid indication that we're getting good return on our investment of money and effort.
yes, in the
And we
consultants
really,
and things.
we've really done a service for the
Yes.
town.
Yep.
Which is totally in line with what the town meeting and the community asked us to do. I mean, we've helped a lot of families, and we've helped the town in terms of meeting their 10% goals, and that's fantastic, that we've been able to make that kind of impact.
All right,
I just want
good
to
question.
clarify, we're not out of the woods yet,
No,
but we're in a really, we can see the clearing through the trees is kind of where we're,
It's
Yeah,
not a
we-
bad analogy.
not a bad analogy.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can't, there's
We're out
no,
of the real
there's no
thicket.
surefire in any legal proceeding.
yeah,
But the veracity of the remand order And having it back in land court, which is consistently upheld, and acted under Ardmore as settled law, puts us in a much better position. You always have concern about the other party looking for ways to extend the process and the cost and, the wear down, right? But legally, we think we're in a good place. And there's side issues of the counterclaim and other complexities that still need to be dealt with. So we're not out of the woods, but at this point, we're in the best spot we could be, given that it's no longer in federal court. And we're sort of back to where we were.
Where council wants us to be.
We're back to where we were in the process in early October,
Okay,
as we were preparing for the hearing in land court.
okay.
So
Yeah, and the eviction threat, from the tenant's perspective,
is
essentially
for now.
the immediate eviction threat has been removed,
yeah.
Correct.
and it's still there, it's potentially there in the future, but it's been pushed out until the courts make decisions.
Yeah.
So they're in good shape for a reasonable period of time. Leases will be renewed, terms and conditions may change a little bit, but
That's not in writing, but it was said in court.
Yes.
That was set in court, and we have seen one case where that was done.
Okay,
Okay, I mean, I talked to the person myself,
okay. All right, thank you very much.
and they did re-up for the, for the year.
yeah, and if they re-up for a year at a number, that means
They're
that
safe
they're
for that
good
year.
for a year.
Right.
Yeah,
And you would
yeah,
think-
it was for a year
Right,
extension.
you would think the owner would want to have leases in place, the owner wouldn't want to have tenants at will.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably hedging their bet in the sense of, well, we want to keep the tenants we have. We don't want to all of a sudden have empty
We don't want to have.
places. And also, we could wait, even if we win and things get changed or we negotiate, it's only a year.
Yep, I mean,
And
Right.
the
Well, the case could
developer's
take
playing
that
the
long.
long game.
yeah, they do. As do we. Okay, next was Endicott Drive. Anything you had a meeting with the rec
I
commission?
went to the rec commission and, we went over what we're looking to do and, got basically two pieces of feedback, two areas where they had some concern. One is that, there's a general concern that, with pickleball courts nearby, there's been reports of noise problems and such. And one of the members said, it is a potential risk in trying to build something there. That's true. Another concern that the commission has is, well, gee, what if we wanted to expand the pickleball courts? And so what that indicates, would we have spaces? It indicates that as you go forward, there's going to be some part of the community is not going to be supportive. But, it's not a deal killer at this point yet. I've been unable to get I have a commitment from the town planner to get the town planner, the director of community development, and the ZBA chair together with us to have a conversation about how we go about moving forward, and we've been having trouble getting that meeting set up. So I'm going after the town planner, and we'll probably soon go after the director of community development to try and make that meeting happen, so we can start having the conversations about how do we, to me, the goal is to be able to go on the warrant for a spring town meeting. That means we got to get a proposal settled by sometime in January.
Because would this be a sale of land
It would,
by the select board?
Transfer.
it'd be
or
the same,
transfer
it'd
of
be the
land.
same deal as we did with Baylor, that, we'd ask the town meeting to agree, and we'd have to have a subdivision plan, because you don't want to transfer the whole 5 acres, you want to transfer part of it.
Right.
But the key thing is to get to the point where we can legitimately talk to the Board of Selectmen and say, hey, here's a legitimate proposal, there's some details to be worked out before ATM,
Right.
but please put this article on the warrant. Because if you don't hit ATM in March, you're not gonna do anything until October.
Right.
Okay. Thanks for all that work on that, Hank. Okay. Rogers Road. Update.
Leah and I.
You and Leah, Hank.
We had agreed that we had talked with Linda and agreed that, hey, maybe the next step was to talk one-on-one with board members to try and get a better understanding of what kinds of things, what kinds of collaborations they would support between ourselves and the Housing Authority Board. Got Linda to agree. Leah and I met last week and kind of
And just for everybody's knowledge,
drafted off, I think I mailed it off.
Linda Strand, right, she's the director.
We drafted off a kind of an outline of how we'd go
Yep.
about having an interview process. I have contact data on all of the board members. I believe there's only four voting board members.
Correct.
At this point. And I've, in the process of getting that contact data, Linda indicated that when she had discussed this with the board, they weren't real excited about what we were proposing to do. But I've started to I've reached out to the first of the board members to try and schedule like an hour one-on-one with Leah, myself, and a board member to just have a conversation about what kind of the things we outlined there. What do you see as being the mission? How do we collaborate more effectively? What would you like to see happen with the Housing Authority over the next few years?
I think is part of that process, any questions you can weave in that are a little more specific to the project,
Right.
as far as their openness to, I think in the interview can also be educational, right? And
Yeah.
so the educational piece is that, the reason we have the funding from the Pulte project is because the town lost 70 units of 62 plus
Housing.
affordable housing. We're looking to replace that. And that also education on sort of the current mode for the state and the federal government to fund public housing is not through public construction, but through public managed construction by private developers. And questions to sense their willingness or at least openness to discuss
Right.
and entertain options that, would involve private development and potentially the transfer of the property. We don't know if I believe I believe there might be a way to do land lease or whatever, but effectively, control of the property, but also noting that part of the RFP preference could be, part of the criteria could be, highly advantageous would be intent to use the housing authority.
Authority is the
And,
management.
and do they want, I mean,
To use them as the management
and I guess,
agent.
in one of my sense, and I haven't chatted with Linda about this, but, the reason Hopkinton and Westborough housing authorities were sharing a director and staff was because the state didn't want independent housing authorities with fewer than 200 units under management. And that was from the Deval Patrick administration, right?
Yep.
Is that still a concern? Would they be more open to the project if there was a way that whatever units were built could be considered part of their inventory, right? Is that still something we need to be worried about
Yep.
in supporting them? So if those types of questions and topics could be,
Yep.
part of the conversation to sway, I think that would be,
Yep, we'll try to gather as much of that kind of
Yeah,
information as we can, and we'll, we'll kind of summarize it, bring it
and
here,
provide some of that,
share it.
education perspective.
Alan, I had a question for you. So I'm under I don't have a lot of understanding of the enabling I read some of the enabling legislation for housing authorities, and it wasn't very helpful in understanding what they're doing. But my understanding from the conversation with Linda is that rents from the units are supply 100% of their revenue. They don't get any subsidies from anybody.
So depends on the housing authority.
Okay,
The Westborough Housing Authority does not get operating funds
right.
from the state. Other housing authorities, particularly more urban, larger ones, do get operating budget. In addition to the rents they collect, they'll get an operating subsidy. So our housing authority does not have an operating subsidy. That said, the state will provide grants funding and subsidy for capital improvements and projects that leverage the reserves
Yep.
that they build. And the state actually has a limit now. My understanding from Linda is that DHCD currently has a limit on percentage of property value that a housing authority can even hold in reserve. So it's almost like if a housing authority saving up for a big project and the savings get too big, that DHCD will pull back other funding to force them to use it, right? So ours is live and die by,
Yeah.
operationally, the rents cover the operation. So increase in rental income or potentially, some remuneration for property or
Property
related to the
transfer.
project could provide,
Yeah, I mean,
funding that could be,
Help subsidize or offset.
help the authority
Yeah.
financially.
Where do they file their financials? How is that? Like, if I wanted to see Westborough Housing Authority, and how are they doing, financially as far as their reserves?
You can call the office and ask for their annual financial report and budget. They have third-party auditors.
So it's not
Um,
posted, like, there's no
and-
online,
I'm not sure they have it on their website.
it's not on their website.
Not on their
Right.
website.
It's public document, you request it, and they're outside of third-party audit, budgets there's regulatory approval for many aspects of their budget and their capital plan from DHCD.
I don't like to, maybe it's not worth it to, because that, when you call somebody up and say, I want your numbers, sometimes that
I'm-
can leave a little bit of a bad
I'll
taste.
make
but
the request. It's not a big deal to request that.
All right.
Yeah, I mean,
I've looked at it.
I know it's
I've
not a
looked-
big deal, it's
I've
just,
looked at it in the past. And
All right.
operationally,
let me
when I
tell-
first got involved in affordable housing, I met with Linda, she shared the information with me. It is, operationally, they appear to be fine. The challenge they have is reserves and getting state funding for capital projects.
Right.
Like
We had
a
tried
lift-
to-
Like a lift, like
like the elevator.
sprinklers, things of that nature is, but that is little housing authority competing with dozens of housing authorities for limited funds from the state, so.
200 units, it's hard to believe they got economy of scale. I mean, to sustain and maintain and do all the things you need to do to keep 200 housing units alive with the income that they've got, it's got to be a challenge.
Oh,
Well, I mean, they're at 110 units right now.
110, okay.
110.
just Westborough.
And that's with, I believe,
Hopkinton,
No. Hopkinton
no
gives
longer
them over
sharing-
200.
not servicing Hopkinton anymore, okay.
Linda's no longer director of Hopkinton. I believe the maintenance supervisor and the, I forget his exact job title, the second
Yeah,
maintenance person, work part-time for both agencies. So it's limited staff. They maintain and manage those buildings well, and, that's their purview. I just
Oh,
think
yeah, no, just-
in this communication process, I think it's partly, I like the nature of the question, sort of what are your vision, get them thinking. One of the challenges with the housing authority is it's an operational board, right?
absolutely.
So their monthly meetings, they're authorizing checks, they're authorizing invoices, and, so it's often, any board that's operational, it's sometimes hard to step back and look at the big picture in the long term. So I like that the questions are in that direction, because it'll give us a better sense of how to best work with them and support them. And again, this isn't, for the public, this isn't us versus them, this is
How do we?
No.
us seeing an opportunity, the town,
Yep.
in voting to transfer money to us, believing in the opportunity to use the property, and figuring out the best way we can work with the housing authority to make it happen.
The town did, because the premise upon which we had, the 1.2 million authorized at town meeting to transfer in was to, assist us in the development in one fashion or another of housing at that location. And that was very, very clear that that was what our vision was, at least. And I think, you know, the Housing Authority does a great job. It's just, if there's land that can be developed, it's, you know, probably not going to be developed in other methods, and we have the need for affordable housing for seniors, it's like,
Right.
we
But
have the
it's-
resources. What's your plan? And I'm not trying to be
No, that's okay.
adversarial, but it's sort of
We work
almost,
together to make something
if I,
happen.
as a resident, that would be my question.
And legitimate question, it's not adversarial, and I think as we move forward, keep in mind that, you know, until the existence of this housing trust, there were no active discussions about developing that property. This would be a major change for Rogers Road. It could be a significant change for the housing authority. It could be done in a way that it's not, right? Where, you know, they could say, we want to be actively involved and make it happen, or they could simply say, you know what? We know there's a need, we want to, but it's not within us, or
Yep.
we're not going to take it on, but we'll subdivide the property and housing trust have at it, right? So there are many, many paths that can lead to development of those units. And, you know, some of them require a change in mindset and, you know, keeping in mind that our housing authority hasn't constructed new units in over 50 years. You know, that, you know, essentially this process is as new to them as it is to us.
Yep.
And it's, you know, a different mindset there. And so I like the idea of the interviews and education and working through it, and finding a common way forward.
Yeah, and I think, just to reiterate Alan's point, you know, having it be educational as well, you know, it's sort of like, we're both in this together, we're trying to find the right thing for the people of Westborough, particularly the seniors in Westborough. And there's definitely things, by working together, that we can accomplish things, you know, more effectively, more easily than if we were to say, because we're going to do this one place or another.
Yep.
We'll find a
We'll
piece of
find a
land
piece of land.
somewhere, because the town has sort of said, we want you to do this, you know, to do it, but it could become more costly, and it just costs the town more to provide this kind of affordable housing. So, be that as it may, thank you.
Just one other question
With that,
for Alan. Are they moving, are we moving ahead with what I call the elevator proposal, or is that,
I need to loop back with Linda on that.
okay.
Because that would.
Just curious as to what's happening.
The way that it was left, as far as I know.
So the issue there is, if I can answer, the issue there is that she has estimates for a lift.
Okay,
What hasn't been, the part of the process I think stalled out was putting together a detailed memo that would go to our, at the time,
To our
Jim
rep.
Eldridge, Senator Eldridge, for an earmark. That sort of got muddied with the change in redistricting.
yeah.
And so now that the election's over, we can reach out to Senator Moore, who
Moore.
will take over
Yep.
in January. And I'm sure that when that comes forward, Senator Eldridge would support it. The other issue is been getting estimates for the cost of the sprinkler system.
Oh, okay.
That, there's a, you know, a desire, there's a need for safety and a desire for safety, to make sure the main building at Rogers Road is fully sprinkled, which it's, there are no sprinklers in that building today.
The elevator, you know, it's very narrow staircases, and God forbid if somebody in the main building there, you know, needed
Yeah,
emergency
The issue is that the number of residents who struggle with stairs
stairs.
is greater than the number of units on the first floor.
That's right.
Yep.
It's-
Yep. So, you know, and especially if, you know, they had to send, you know, the paramedics up, EMTs up,
Yeah,
and
and-
extract somebody from up there, it would not be an easy task.
It's marginal.
Yep.
If that building was built today, it would be sprinkled.
Well, yeah, it's both that and other accessibility. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, I think we're just open for any other questions, decision, or discussions. Alan?
A couple of quick things. Question 5, our local Community
Oh,
Preservation
yes.
Act
Yep.
passed.
Fantastic.
And so the town will now proceed with the process of creating a Community Preservation Committee, which will oversee the trust fund and review the projects and make recommendations to the town for votes at town meeting. The composition of that committee is 5 to 9 individuals. There are 5 positions stipulated by state law. One of those, the way the law was written, was a representative from the local housing authority. But the state law also says, or anyone from a board of comparable scope. My understanding from Mass Housing Partnership, I'm trying to get data, is most Community Preservation Act communities, if there's a housing trust, it's the housing trust that would hold that housing seat, because currently and presently, that's how the money and the process tends to flow for the development of additional affordable housing. And so I'm gathering data on that. I did have a brief conversation with Select Board Member Marshall, who is on, part of the exploratory committee and helped led the Pro 5 campaign, to the, as far as thoughts about, the formation of the committee, which will eventually come before the Select Board for implementation. That's one thing. The second is Alma, the director of the senior center, called me asking if there's anything the trust can do. A number of senior citizens who are in market rate units are receiving rent increases that they can't afford. And she's starting to see what she is afraid is a trend of senior citizens being displaced out of market rate apartments. I told her, unfortunately, we're not able to do individual subsidies or things like that, on an ongoing basis, in particularly in market rate units. But I did direct her some other resources. Many of these seniors will now need to enter the lottery for affordable housing.
If they're eligible.
However, what the conversation, did lead to is, well, how fast is the town going to be producing more senior affordable housing? And to that end, she did ask about the Rogers Road project. So I offered, and she's going to check with the board and schedule for representatives of the trust to go to a Council on Aging board meeting to discuss what we do, how we do it, what works, our hopes and dreams. Because she felt that would be a good way potentially for the Council on Aging to then help advocate for more 62-plus affordable housing.
They were very, it was Hank, you, I, and Kate went before them when we were looking for support, for town meeting vote. And, we had talked about some of the things we were doing, et cetera, and they were very excited, COA was, on the vision of developing Rogers Road. They thought that would be, fantastic. So I'd be willing to go to it, been there before. I know some of obviously the folks on that committee. How was it left with Alma?
She's going to see about getting us on an agenda.
On an
instead
agenda,
of
and she'll
invite.
let us know?
Yes.
Okay, so I can go and, I think, Hank,
I'd be glad to
maybe
go, I'd
Hank
be glad to
and
go along.
the three of
I
us,
know-
three
I know
amigos could
personally
go.
most of the members of that committee, so
Huh?
I know most of the members of that committee personally. so-
They're in our cohort.
Well, at least 3 of those
What?
people are
What
my
are you
neighbors,
laughing
so.
Well, I want to just first publicly acknowledge Alma's advocacy for the folks that they serve at the senior center, and gathering information from the Housing Trust about our our the ability for the Housing Trust to support seniors who are having housing insecurity right now due to inflation costs and all those things. And so I'm just curious about, because I know that this is a question that has come up from Youth and Family Services as well, for families who are just really struggling to pay their rent, and they are in market rate apartments because there's no affordable apartments, and so they're scrambling to pay for these market rate apartments. And other things are suffering, like their ability to pay for food and clothing and all of those other things so that they can at least have a roof over their heads. And so I know because of the COVID pandemic, we did the COVID Relief Fund to support families through that hardship. And now we're still dealing with COVID and we're also dealing with inflation. And I mean, the problem of the day is just another problem of the day, right? Like there's still housing insecurity, and there's still problems with people being able to afford staying in housing. And so I'm just curious about the Housing Trust's ability to establish some sort of ongoing emergency rental relief, if that is something that is the purview of a trust or not.
I could put you into this, the Sudbury Housing Trust has a program like that. I'm doing some other business with them, so I'm not familiar with the details, but I could put you in touch with the people who do that. They could give you an idea of what that housing trust does, and that might help you understand what we might be able to do.
Okay.
I'll talk to you offline and send you
Yep.
some
The
information.
conservation restriction with the, not.
That's what I'm trying to sell that land over on.
Yeah, okay. Hank and I go back on
Yeah.
I know what he's talking about.
That's my other part-time job.
Yeah, your fifth part-time job. Anyhow, yeah, I think it's market rate rents are just crazy in this area, Metro West. You know, nothing's being really built except, I mean, there's condos. Some of those are restricted by age. The apartments there are apartments that have been built and are being developed in neighboring towns. You know, there's the Edgemere development.
But I mean,
things
and
like
we're
that.
working on building new development. I mean, that is our major goal, right? Is to build more affordable housing. At the same time, there are still families who don't quite meet that eligibility, but it's
Right.
still really hard to make ends meet. And so I'm just curious about our ability to potentially fill some of that gap. If there is, I haven't read our bylaws well enough to understand whether or not, because I know we did it for COVID, so I just don't know if we can
Yeah,
continue to
so
do that.
COVID really is an exception.
Yeah,
That, in general, housing trusts aren't designed to provide that kind of
Subsidy.
ongoing subsidy.
Yeah.
Because our funding tends to be very, very project-related.
right.
And I'd actually be concerned that we would get pushback from the community,
Yeah,
right, on that. So I think it's worth looking, if you want to look at
Need
the
to
Sudbury
understand.
program to understand the scope. I think that's good. I think there are things that we can do as part of sort of the, our charge based on the votes at town meeting, what we presented and the understanding, and even the wording of our bylaws, is filed with the state, is affordable and moderate income housing. And so, our focus today has been on projects that are clearly in the affordable side. I've got, there's one goal that we have that I've been working on in the background that's aimed more at affordable housing on the purchase side, but we could look and see what options there were for moderate income housing on the
Okay.
rental side too,
okay.
and see if, we need to sort of, if we feel we have the bandwidth. I mean, right now, as we see, Baylor is a small square foot house that is a big project for us.
Oh, yeah.
In part because it's,
The stuff's not easy.
the first Endicott Drive is 1 to 3
Somewhat more
units.
complex.
But it is a bigger project, and if we get Rogers Road moving, we're talking, 40, 60 units. It's a big project.
Yeah.
But we can definitely, let's chat and look at what we might be, what options we have that are within our mission, within our peer review, within the nature of our funding, at higher percentages of AMI.
One of the things that, and I know this won't affect renters, was the town, did pass the senior, I'm calling it the senior tax credit or property tax credit article at town meeting, which is modeled after the senior circuit breaker, for state taxes. At the state level, not only do they provide relief to homeowners to pay relative to their income, high income tax, state income tax, but they also serve renters by taking 25% of the rent in lieu of property tax payments. So they do, because it all flows down through the, eventually to the landlord, and, landlord's going to recover his taxes one way or her taxes one way or the other. Unfortunately, and I understand why they didn't incorporate that into what we did as that home rule petition last month. So I don't know if there's some place in the future, but it wouldn't be close in to try to incorporate renters in that, which for owners, it can do up to $1,170 in credit. I mean, bottom line credit. You may not even owe any taxes. You'll still get that money back from the state, or get that credit from the state. Unfortunately, the town didn't do that because they were modeling that home rule petition based upon what some other towns, like I think Lexington has it, and I think Concord, and a few other towns. So they pretty much modeled, because they figured this probably has the best chance of going through the legislative process. So, but
Because of our funding mechanisms,
Say again?
because of our funding mechanisms that are spotty, I mean, they're, you don't know whether you're gonna get funding tomorrow. We can help people bridge into long-term solutions. I believe it'd be inappropriate for us to be a long-term solution. So if folks are income challenged today, it's not gonna get better tomorrow. So helping them helping to bridge them into a long-term solution would be reasonable to talk about. But trying to being a permanent solution for them long-term, I mean, multi-year rental assistance programs would be really tough for us to justify.
As I think about it, considering the total cost of housing, the state dramatically increased funding for, heating assistance.
Yep.
And it's actually oil, gas, and electric now. So, if the rent's too high, but you can lower the utility bill, or get 3 free months of heat in the winter, does that free up enough cash to help with the rental difference, at least, or part of it? Things of that nature. So, it may also be worth a conversation with Youth and Family Services and making sure that information about expanded programs is available.
Yes, and Youth and Family Services doesn't have enough bandwidth to case manage all of this, because I think that's the other
Right.
thing that I just want to point out that here is that all of these programs that are available to people are wonderful, and they also take time to actually
Right.
go through the process of doing that. And if you're a family that already has 3 jobs, when are you going to find time to go and apply for some of these programs? And so that's where case management can be a super helpful tool for families. But our Youth and Family Services Department does not have case management as a available service at this point in time. And so that's where I'm also kind of curious about the Housing Trust's ability to staff case management services through Youth and Family Services potentially to, and I'm totally speaking on my own here, not like advocating for, but as somebody who has done youth commission and who understands Youth and Family Services needs to a certain extent, I'm thinking about all of these things. And so I'm just thinking about, you know, what are the ways in which we can help as a trust to support families here in town and seniors here in town who have limited bandwidth themselves. Because you're right, Alan, like there are programs out there to help families, but it's like getting to those programs is not always easy. And so, I mean, I just...
Perhaps, so there may be things that, once again, you know, to sort of echo Hank, you know, we've done sort of bridge things, you know, more project-oriented things, not long-term subsidy.
Yeah.
I think if there was a way to identify a need that is a bounded need, you know, so like, oh, if we got some people that could assist, however, for some number of months, to try to get them assistance to offset the cost of their rents. That may be something that may be more palatable to, you know, I think the trust. But we'd have to get, you know, more detail. I'm just saying a shorter term, like we did with Sarah.
Yeah.
You know, we sort of bounded it, we allocated, you know, given amount of money, you know, we set our bounds and requirements, et cetera. And I'm just saying, as just one member of the trust, I may be more open to doing something along those lines to facilitate.
There's some potential opportunities let's chat.
Okay.
And one
All
other
right.
update,
Yeah.
I have been appointed to the planning, the long-range plan implementation committee,
Yep,
and we'll start, the first meeting is gonna be sometime next week, and I'll find out what's going on. My intent is to get involved with the affordable housing implementation part of the plan.
yep.
Okay.
So
So by December, you'll have an implementation plan?
Fantastic.
I'm
Well
becoming,
done, Dave. Well done.
Excellent, and
I'm
thank you.
becoming the resident mole.
We don't call it resident mole, we call it liaison.
Liaison, I'm sorry.
Cross-pollination, collaboration, liaison.
Yeah, we did that with the AFC a lot. So, all right, any other items? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all those in favor of adjourning? All right, and thank you, Westborough TV.